2.5 years after the fighting began, Ukraine attacked Moscow in the early hours of September 10th. This is the largest Ukrainian drone attack on Russian soil since the beginning of the war and is sure to have consequences.
Ukraine launches largest drone attack yet on Moscow, killing one, Russia says.
Ukraine launched, according to Russian sources, 144 suicide drones against 9 regions of the country, including the Moscow region, which has more than 21 million inhabitants. Most of the drones were shot down by Russian defenses, but some, after flying more than 430 kilometers through Russian skies, managed to hit their targets. The objective? Well, this time, it was a bit different. Up until now, except for occasional mistakes, the Ukrainians have focused primarily on military targets when attacking Russia. Bases, air defenses, strategic infrastructure, or fuel depots, for example. However, what happened a few hours ago was different. The Ukrainians have attacked targets such as Moscow's Zhukovsky airport, which, yes, does have a military use, but is mostly civilian. It's a mixed airport. Mind you, at the time of the attack, it was outside its hours of operation. In any case, the attack forced the closure of both Domodedovo and Vnukovo airports for more than 6 hours. In total, about 50 flights had to be diverted. But take note, that's not all. This time, Ukrainian drones have also hit residential neighborhoods. In Ramenskoye, a commuter town located less than 50 kilometers from the heart of Moscow, at least 2 apartment towers have been hit. And that's not all. A 46-year-old woman has died, and 3 others are wounded. In fact, she is the first civilian fatality in a Ukrainian drone attack in the Moscow region since the war began. Ukraine has so far not commented on this attack, although it's assumed to be a response to the previous night's Russian drone strike, with almost 50 drones and 3 injuries.
Ukraine says overnight Russian drone attack on Kyiv was 5th this month.
According to Kyiv, Ukraine has had to endure 3 drone strikes against civilians this week alone, 5 so far this month. And that is precisely why this major Ukrainian attack can be understood as a response, a warning, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Of course, this time they have touched a red line from which they have so far stayed away, attacking civilian spaces. Perhaps you can interpret this as Kyiv wanting to send a message loud and clear, not to the Kremlin, but to the Russians. Something like, this senseless war continues and you will no longer be on the sidelines. Not only will your boys die, now we can also put you in our targets. First in Kursk and now in Moscow. Putin is not protecting you, he is endangering you. Even so, what can I say? Even if strategically it makes sense, attacking civilian spaces has to remain a red line, because Ukraine cannot behave as Moscow does. And it's not only a question of ethics, which it is, but also of self-interest. Attacks on civilian areas jeopardize the support of weapons and money from the international community that Ukraine so badly needs. Now, what exactly is Ukraine looking to achieve with an attack like this? What strategic justification does it have? Is it yet another sign of where the war is evolving? What is going on? And what does the Kursk operation have to do with this huge drone strike? In this video, we're going to tell you all the key facts about the Ukrainian attack against the Russian capital.
Changing the rules.
Ukraine wants to change the rules of war, and it's doing so by changing how the war itself is developing. Until not so long ago, this conflict practically consisted of Russia fighting in Ukraine, attacking Ukrainian cities, and perpetrating all kinds of crimes to frighten Ukrainians, who were basically limited to defending themselves, launching the occasional counter-offensive, and trying to minimize the damage. But of course, all this left their country in a mess. Well, now it seems that Kyiv has set out to end, or at least blur this division of roles, by taking the war to Russia. Since this summer, we have been seeing how the Ukrainians have intensified their attacks on oil refineries and depots, on weapons depots, energy plants, air bases, and military factories inside Russia itself. They have also invaded Kursk and have now carried out a major drone strike relatively close to the very Kremlin. But what exactly is Ukraine pursuing with these operations? Well, we can identify 4 major objectives. Until now, and apart from a few very sporadic scares, Moscow had been insulated from the worst consequences of the war. Yes, they are under the influence of sanctions, higher food prices, have many financial restrictions, and can no longer move freely around the world. But, naturally, there are much worse things. I'm talking about the fear, anxiety, and terror that comes from knowing that at any moment, a shell could fall in your own neighborhood. It's a form of psychological attrition that also reminds them that there is a war going on, because Moscow is not by a long shot, the place where the Russian government is recruiting the most young people to send them to a terrible fate on the Ukrainian front. In this case, the less fortunate are those second-rate Russians who live in the far southern and eastern regions of the country. So, from this perspective, the attacks could be a way to remind the Muscovites of the reality of the war, and, in the process, shatter Putin's propaganda that his troops already dominate the war. Of course, Ukrainians are never going to have the capacity to reach the levels of terror that Russia has been inflicting throughout Ukraine for the past 2.5 years, but at least it's something. It's a way to prevent life in Moscow, Russia's political and administrative center, from proceeding normally while Ukrainian cities are being burned to the ground. Another aim of this attack is surely to demoralize and weaken the power of Putin and the Russian government among the military ranks and within their own civil society. And despite the fact that a large part of Russians have unfortunately lost any critical capacity regarding this war due to propaganda and repression, it's not possible to stop the tide. Now, many will wonder how on earth a country like Ukraine can continue to attack Russia 2.5 years after the war started. They will wonder if this is the same protection Vladimir Putin promised them, and if it affects them directly. They may also wonder what exactly is the point of the special operation, because if it was to protect Russia, it seems pretty clear that it's not succeeding. Why go to Ukraine to defend your country if you're only making it more and more dangerous at home? In other words, the Ukrainians could be trying to sow distrust, doubt, and make this war have a political cost for the Kremlin. In Kyiv, they know that Russia has enough men to keep feeding the meat grinder in Ukraine for a long time to come. So they need to weaken morale in the Russian military ranks and generate distrust among Russian society itself. Of course, wait a minute, because doing all this is an extremely risky move. Why? Well, because when we talk about Russia and Russians, we can totally forget about the way we would think and act ourselves. I mean that a large proportion of Russians, including many of the conscripts they sent to Ukraine, are contaminated by extreme nationalism and crazy patriotism that is constantly fed to them by government propaganda. In fact, propaganda is the only thing that is efficient and really works well in Russia right now. And why do we tell you this? Because the effect could even be the opposite of the desired one. Ukrainians play with fire and know that they can get burned.
Moscow says recent Ukrainian attacks justify the invasion of the country. There is no way that nighttime strikes on residential neighborhoods can be associated with military action. The Kyiv regime continues to demonstrate its nature. They are our enemies, and we must continue the special military operation to protect ourselves from such actions.
Protecting themselves from the actions of Ukraine. Poor things. Seeing is believing. But what may seem crazy to any of us could be understood in a totally different way in Russia. As difficult as it may be to believe, many Russians feel victimized by Ukraine and the West. Why? You never know, but the fact remains that this explains why opinion polls show that more than 60% of Russians support the invasion. And pay attention, because I'm referring to studies from the beginning of this year. And now, following the invasion of Kursk and the attacks against Moscow, the percentage may be even higher, which may end up giving oxygen to Putin's government to sell a discourse that justifies the whole war from its beginning in February 2022 until now. According to their worldview, the one created and fed by public propaganda, Russia is protecting itself from dangerous Nazis who now dare to attack even Moscow itself. So watch out for this. But in any case, the Ukrainians believe that this is a way to discredit Putin, and that this is a point for their plans. Which brings us directly to the third objective that these attacks may target. Visualpolitik community, Ukrainians are starting to be exhausted and tired of this damn war. Yes, Ukrainians still support the war, but more and more of them think, or at least accept, that they have to negotiate with Russia. But obviously, in order to be able to negotiate, you have to have something to negotiate with, and also show that you aren't weak. Because otherwise, any negotiation would end up becoming a cession. And so another possible objective for these latest Ukrainian operations is precisely to demonstrate strength. Let's not forget that during the first half of this war, the Ukrainians had hardly any capabilities for attacking targets inside Russia. But for some time now, that has changed radically. During wartime, Ukraine has managed to develop an entire indigenous military drone industry. According to the Ukrainian government, the country already had some 200 registered companies and up to 300 more small producers making drones for use in warfare. When Russia invaded Ukraine, there were only 7 companies with this capability. Well, now with the gigantic development of this capability, the country expects to meet its goal of manufacturing 1 million drones annually by the end of 2024. By far, Ukrainian drones are becoming the most feared indigenous weapon of war. In fact, last June, the USF, the Unmanned Systems Forces, which were formed earlier this year, became a separate type of force within the armed forces. In other words, the force that operates aerial and marine drones, as well as robotic combat systems, now has the same rank as the Air Force, Navy, or army in organizational terms. And it's no wonder. Drones are playing a key role in allowing Ukraine to conduct fairly deep and precise airstrikes inside Russia without having to be subject to Western restrictions. So the recent attack on Russian territory is also a way of saying, watch out, we're increasingly able to escalate the war and make massive attacks on you that you aren't going to be able to stop. So we'd better negotiate, and negotiate one-on-one. And finally, Ukraine's fourth possible objective with this major attack on Russian soil may be to force the Kremlin to become more involved in the Kursk operation. Because of course, the Ukrainians didn't invade Kursk and occupy about 100 localities in order to take over that territory. What they expected was that the Russians would dilute their attacks in the Donbass by sending many resources and men to try to recover the part occupied by the Ukrainians in this oblast.
Тобто це ідея і одна із цілей Курської області – це стягнення російських військ в їх точку, на їх територію. Зараз я вже можу це комунікувати, тому що вони стягнули там на сьогодні біля 60 тисяч вже там.
60,000 may seem too high. The problem is that they are largely a few isolated units from the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts, and mostly untrained and poorly equipped conscripts who have been equipped with a single mission to act as a buffer to slow down the offensive. There will be time later to worry about the reconquest, because for now, in the Kremlin, the main objective is still what happens on the Donetsk front. No distractions.
Russian army has been notching up territorial gains, cutting deeper towards the city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk province, a crucial supply and reinforcement hub for Ukraine's frontline troops.
The attack early Tuesday morning could also be an escalation attempt to de-escalate tensions on the Donbass front. In theory, this may seem contradictory, but if it's confirmed that some of the drones have been launched from inside Kursk, or from positions where the Ukrainian army could not operate before, the message to the Russians could be very clear. The Kursk invasion has damaged our national security, and the government does nothing. And even if no drone had been launched from Kursk, the attack may serve to put more pressure on the Russian public, to put more pressure on the government to regain the occupied territories. Visualpolitik community, the drone attack on Moscow is part of a new military strategy. Ukraine wants to put more and more pressure on Russia. Will this new war plan take effect? Will there be changes in the Russian ranks? Will they devote more effort to recapturing Kursk, which is what Kyiv wants? And how do you think the Russian response will play out? Well, here on Visualpolitik, we will keep an eye on everything that happens and we'll tell you all about it. For now, all those questions are for you. Leave your comment below and let's start a debate. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any news. As always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.